Cuba has been involved in pretty much every threat that the United States has faced from the Western Hemisphere, whether it's intelligence, whether it's aligning with criminal groups, whether it's working with external state actors. The Cuban government has been intricately involved in a lot of these threats, and fundamentally, we're involved inside Venezuela. And
imminent threat from the Cuban government to the American people right now.
Welcome back to Freedom Forge, where we stand for truth, strength, and the principles that built this nation. If you believe in defending America, holding leaders accountable, and cutting through political noise, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe right now, because today's topic is something every serious American needs to hear. This Senate hearing we're reacting to focuses on national security, foreign policy, and the growing concerns about how the United States is handling threats from countries like Cuba, as well as the broader issue of leadership rhetoric versus actual strategy. Lawmakers question military officials about everything from terrorist threats on U.S. soil to potential conflicts involving Cuba and even controversial statements about Greenland.
And I recognize the gentlelady from Virginia, Ms. Elfreth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very proud to represent Maryland, but always proud to follow my colleague from Virginia. It's okay. We have very similar interests. Very similar interests. Thank you. Thank you to our gentleman for being here. I'm going to take us back a couple years to 2019 when three U.S. Navy sailors were killed in a terrorist attack at Naval Station Pensacola by a Saudi trainee. One of them, Navy officer Joshua Watson, just 23, was a recent graduate of the United States Naval Academy that I am proud to represent. Two others, Airman Mohammed Haitham, just 19 from Florida, Airman Apprentice Cameron Walters, 21 of Georgia, were killed in the attack. The families of the victims deserve answers and some type of resolution for the fact that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia did not properly vet the trainee that committed these horrible acts. Can you, anybody, give me kind of a status check on the litigation and whether the families have received compensation for their loss?
I'm happy to get you a status check after I go back to the office, but I will say vetting is something that we're particularly focused on, particularly as it applies to military installations. This is something that we looked at specifically when we started creating the national defense areas on the southwest border, and now we start to look at protocols that we can apply throughout all U.S. Federal installations as well as military installations.
Could I get that response maybe in a week's time? Is that appropriate?
I'm happy to respond. Yes.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to Cuba. Yesterday afternoon, the president told reporters, "I do believe I'll have the honor of taking Cuba." When he was asked what he meant by this, he said, "Taking Cuba in some form, whether I free it, take it. I think I can do anything I want with it. If you want to know the truth, they're a very weakened nation right now." General Donovan's prepared statements do not mention Cuba, nor does the National Defense Strategy identify Cuba as a threat. Can anybody identify for me or explain or define what take it could mean? And then further, what imminent threat the government of Cuba is placing on Americans right now?
As I mentioned before, Congresswoman, Cuba has been involved in pretty much every threat that the United States has faced from the Western Hemisphere, whether it's intelligence, whether it's aligning with criminal groups, whether it's working with external state actors. The Cuban government has been intricately involved in a lot of these threats, and fundamentally, we're involved inside Venezuela. And
imminent threat from the Cuban government to the American people right now.
Through networks, working with adversaries of the United States.
So as you probably know, the prolonged blockade has caused, as of yesterday, Cuba's power grid to go down. Can you please help me understand, are we preparing to go and invade Cuba?
So the shortages that are happening in Cuba on both electricity and power have to do with the fact that Venezuela was subsidizing oil shipments to Cuba at pretty much a fraction of the cost in exchange for security personnel that was identified when we conducted Operation Absolute Resolve.
Are we preparing to invade Cuba?
Ma'am, I'm not familiar with any plans on Cuba. What I'm saying is that fundamentally, Cuba has provided a significant threat to the United States hemispheric security for decades and close to half a century.
Okay, I'm going to keep going with this kind of theme of a disconnect between the president's rhetoric and I think what we're actually seeing imminent threats on the ground. I'm going to take us back to Greenland, which feels like a decade ago, but was only a short few months ago. There is no doubt from anybody on this committee that China and Russia pose significant threats to Arctic security, particularly because they've outpaced us on icebreakers and are far more aggressive. But we can all agree, I hope, that it is too broad of a terrain to monitor and protect on our own. That's why we have allies. That's why we have particularly our NATO allies. Yet, again, the president's rhetoric I'll just quote him: "We are going to do something about Greenland. If we don't do it the easy way, we'll do it the hard way." General Gio, I imagine that makes your job particularly difficult. I was heartened to hear in your opening statements respect for our allies, our NATO allies, how important Denmark and Greenland are to Arctic security. I guess my fundamental question here is, what do you want to do, or what does the president want to do with Greenland that the 1951 treaty doesn't allow us to do?
Congresswoman, we are working with Denmark through the Department of State to expand some of the authorities that are in the 1951 treaty to give increased access to different bases across Greenland as we look at the increasing threat and the strategic importance of Greenland. But everything that we're doing through NORTHCOM is through Greenland and through Denmark.
So I'm hearing we could have achieved all of this diplomatically through our NATO alliance without threatening to take or to invade Greenland by force.
Well, I can speak to the mill-to-mill portion, and we have a very strong relationship with Denmark.
And I want to commend you for maintaining that relationship despite what some of the news or what the president may say. I think the mill-to-mill relationship is essential here, despite that rhetoric. With that, I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Gentlelady from the great state of Maryland yields back.
Now, after watching this, I've got to say, this hearing exposed something deeper than just policy disagreements. It revealed a disconnect, a real gap between what is being said politically and what is actually happening on the ground when it comes to defending this country. Let's start with something that should never be forgotten. The discussion brought up the tragic terrorist attack at Naval Air Station Pensacola back in 2019, where American service members were killed by a foreign trainee. These were young Americans, people who stepped up to serve their country, and they paid the ultimate price. And here's the question that still lingers. How did that happen? How did someone with dangerous intentions make it through the vetting process and gain access to a U.S. military installation? That's not a small failure. That's a national security breakdown. And what we heard in this hearing is that vetting is now being looked at more closely, especially when it comes to military bases and federal installations. But let's be honest, this should have been airtight from the beginning. When it comes to protecting American lives, there is no room for error. Now, the conversation then shifts into something that really caught my attention. Cuba. You had a moment where lawmakers were trying to understand statements suggesting the United States could take Cuba in some form. That's not a small statement. That's the kind of rhetoric that raises serious questions about strategy, diplomacy, and military intent. And here's where I'm going to give you my honest take. America should always be strong. We should never appear weak to our enemies. But strength is not the same as reckless talk. Strength is clarity. Strength is strategy. Strength is knowing exactly when to act and when to apply pressure through alliances and diplomacy. From what we heard, military officials made it clear there are no known plans to invade Cuba, but they also emphasized that Cuba has been involved in various threats in the Western Hemisphere, including working with adversaries and influencing regional instability. That's important, because while some may dismiss Cuba as a weakened nation, the reality is that influence doesn't always come from strength alone. It comes from alliances, intelligence networks, and strategic positioning. And if Cuba is working with countries that oppose American interests, then yes, that's something we should take seriously. But here's the issue, the mixed messaging. On one hand, you have aggressive political rhetoric suggesting bold actions. On the other hand, you have military leadership emphasizing cooperation, alliances, and measured responses. That kind of disconnect is dangerous, because when allies hear one thing and officials say another, it creates confusion. And when enemies hear inconsistency, they look for opportunity. Then we get into another key moment, Greenland. Now, this might sound strange at first, but it's actually about Arctic security, which is becoming a major geopolitical battleground. Countries like China and Russia are expanding their presence in the Arctic, investing in icebreakers, and positioning themselves for future control over resources and shipping routes. And what did we hear? That the United States is working with Denmark through existing agreements to increase access and strengthen cooperation in Greenland. That's how it should be done, through alliances, not threats. Because let's be real, America doesn't stand alone. We are strongest when we stand with our allies, especially NATO partners. And that brings me to the bigger picture. This hearing wasn't just about Cuba or Greenland or even past attacks. It was about leadership. It was about whether the United States is speaking with one clear voice when it comes to national security. Because when it comes to defending this country, there is no room for confusion. As a right-wing patriot, I believe in a strong America. I believe in a military that is respected, feared by enemies, and trusted by allies. But I also believe that strength comes from consistency, discipline, and a clear strategy, not mixed signals. We need leadership that understands the weight of its words, because words matter on the global stage. They influence markets, alliances, and even the decisions of adversaries. And right now, what this hearing showed is that there are still questions that need answers. Are we fully prepared to handle emerging threats? Are we aligning our rhetoric with our strategy? Are we doing everything possible to prevent tragedies like Pensacola from ever happening again? These are not partisan questions. These are American questions, and every citizen should be paying attention. If you want more real, unfiltered breakdowns like this, make sure you like this video, subscribe to Freedom Forge, and stay informed. Because the future of this country depends on people who are willing to pay attention and speak up. And I'll see you in the next one.